Slachel Twagwalapu Ce Ab de Ishid, Kayla Gayet Seedsta. Good day, my name's Kayla Gayet, and this is one of our first recorded walkthroughs of our new Since Time Immemorial units here at Highline. This particular unit is a literacy and since time immemorial combination unit. That means that while we use since time immemorial standards and expectations, we're structuring it as a literacy unit. This specific unit was developed for kindergarten, however, could easily be implemented in any early elementary classroom. This literacy unit uses the story Salmon Boy as its core reading. Now, Salmon Boy is a very special story in the Pacific Northwest region. That being said, there are multiple versions of this story. For this recording and for the unit that we've been handing out to teachers, we've used the Salmon Boy story that was created by Sea Alaska Heritage Institute as a part of their Baby Raven Reads program. That being said, you can use other versions of the Salmon Boy story, and those are linked on the resources page. However, this particular resource met a lot of our wants and expectations from a core reading as far as being dual language. It has great pictures, and the kids really enjoyed using it and going through it. So, in the next section, we are going to go through a very brief overview of the unit so that we can kind of see how it breaks down. So we'll look at the scope and sequence and just look at where the lessons lay within the unit. After that, we'll go into a more in-depth day-by-day look of what lessons look like and how we can use them in the classroom, as well as making sure we're bridging learning home. We're ready for the scope and sequence walkthrough. This is how the kindergarten literacy unit for Salmon Boy looks. There are a couple key things I want to point out before we move forward. First, everything will be divided into these columns. So we have it divided by day, big ideas or key concepts, student activities, assessments, or how you will know as the teacher that they've accomplished the task. And then we have 3 columns for standards, which is very important and very cool as far as our new unit development. These newer units meet not only social studies standards from our STI standards, this one, because it's literacy, also meets literacy standards, as well as social emotional standards. As we found, the more that we work with Since Time Immemorial, is that it really aligns with social emotional learning. And so we've gone ahead and made sure to add this column and to fit in those benchmarks that our students are meeting. So as we look at day 1, it's important to recognize that we're not actually reading the text at this point. Day 1 is really to introduce the students to the book so that if you do have readers at kindergarten, this would be a good time to cover up some of the text. We want them to be making connections and predictions about the text just based on clues from the pictures. So we have 2 activities for this day. The first is making connections before reading, and the second is the cognitive content dictionary. Now, cognitive content dictionaries are GLAD strategies, and that being said, all of these new Since Time Immemorial units and lessons heavily depend on GLAD strategies. If you do not feel comfortable with using those strategies, if you haven't been trained or it's been a while, we always encourage refreshing some of that teaching, as well as being really creative and using best practice if you are not GLAD certified or if you don't feel comfortable with some of those strategies. Moving on from day 1. Day 2 has 2 different activities if we are not counting the cognitive content dictionary. Cognitive content dictionary will be at the end of every day, and that is just to remind you, if you're familiar with that strategy, that that's to be done every day. So our first activity for this day is the picture walk, and sometimes we call this observation charts. It's the same process. And then day 2 is also when you have your first reading with students. We really encourage, if we can, get every book at a table group, or if we can make sure that we are all reading the same book at the same time. So if we're doing whole group, that we're making sure we're projecting it. That is where we're really hoping that this is done as a whole group. Day 3, we want our students to revisit our observations as well as introduce our inquiry chart. If you're not familiar with the phrase inquiry chart, another phrase we use is a KWL chart, and it's just asking students to look at our pictures and then to critically think about them. Day 4 is our second whole class reading, and while we're here, I want to encourage that there can be more reading than just the whole group reading. We can have small group readings in between our whole group readings, and just being really creative with how much we want to read this book, either as whole group, small group, individual. So after our second reading, we're going to revisit our inquiry chart, and then we're going to go and move into our guided oral practice, another GLAD strategy. Day 5, we want to revisit our sentence patterning chart, which we got from our guided oral practice, as well as start to look at some of our character traits. This is a very important activity to meet a lot of our different standards. And so I encourage, if you feel like your class needs more time on this specific activity, go ahead and take that time now. The days are really just used as pacing. If you feel like your day 5 needs to be 3 days, go for it. Whatever works best for your class. We just wanted to make sure that we had a general idea of the flow of the unit. So when we move past our character traits for our Salmon Boy story, we then want to look at our character traits personally as compared to Salmon Boy. And we have some graphic organizers that students are making at this time. Once again, if GLAD strategies are not in your wheelhouse, feel free to just use best practice as far as making sure students are making these connections. Day 7 and 8, we have our third whole class reading, as well as beginning work on using summaries. Summarization in a kindergarten level is very important, but also can be very difficult. So once again, please go at your own pace and make sure that you are using what works best for your class. So day 9 and 10 are really days that focus on our final project. And the final project is very important as far as not only finishing the unit off, but really making those home to school connections. So our final project, there is a section of it that we do in class as a whole class. There is a second section that we ask that students do at home. And we'll talk more in depth about this project. We don't want to make students feel uncomfortable with it. We really want to make sure that we're reaching out and that we're lifting up other students and their cultures and their traditions at home, just as much as we have in this whole unit lifted up the native people of this area. So next, we're going to take a look at the day-by-day lessons. If you feel like you don't need a look at day-by-day lessons, that you really understand this concept, you are more than free to stop this here. But if you have some questions about certain days or certain projects, we'll be doing that next.